Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the fourth week of Friday Opera Explorers from Irish National Opera. I'm Fergus Shield, Artistic Director of Irish National Opera, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to tonight's programme. We've come to the point where we're listening to some Russian repertoire tonight, and I am particularly excited about it. We're doing these online concerts because we want to keep in touch with our audiences at a time when we can't perform in theatres in person. And we wanted to let you know a little bit about things that are down the road when we get back to performing, plans that we're making, and to share some really brilliant music and some great recordings of some wonderful singers. The format, as before, is that the singers have been pre-recorded over the last few weeks. I'm coming to you live. I'm here tonight in Wexford in the National Opera House, where we're in the process of filming Gerald Barry's opera, Alice's Adventures Underground. In fact, two of the singers we're going to hear singing later, Claudia Boyle and Gavan Ring, are on stage just right now in ridiculous costumes, looking amazing and sounding wonderful as we film this exciting opera. In the weeks and months ahead, we're planning lots of things. We have some outdoor events over the summer, and we're hoping, against all hopes, that we'll be back performing in theatres in the autumn. And we look forward to welcoming you in person as soon as we can. When I put together the programs for this 5-week series, I said to the singers involved that I'd love them to choose from composers who we haven't yet programmed at Irish National Opera. That's why we gave it the title Friday Opera Explorer, because we're exploring some new repertoire. At least it's new to the company. Some of it is very well known and some less well known. And I guess in tonight's program, we have some of the lesser known repertoire. We have music from Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin, which would be towards the best known of the operas we featured, but lots of other arias as well. And there's in fact 4 composers in tonight's program. They are Rimsky-Korsakov, Borodin, Mussorgsky, and Tchaikovsky. And we'll be hearing about those, and the artists will introduce the various arias that we're going to sing. We're going to hear 6 arias sung by Sarah Shine, Gyula Nagy, Brenton Ryan, Claudia Boyle, Gavan Ring, and Ben McAteer. And I promise you there's some exquisite arias to come. All of these composers that we're featuring, the 4 of them tonight, they're all contemporaries of each other in 19th century Russia. They were all born in the 1830s and 1840s, just within a few years of each other. But there's a real division between them. Rimsky-Korsakov, Borodin, and Mussorgsky were 3 composers who were part of a group called the Mighty Handful. There was another 2 in that group as well, Balakirev and Kui. And these 5 composers were very nationalistic, really, and they wanted to introduce Russian nationalism and romanticism into their music. And Tchaikovsky was different from the others, and he had a more European outlook. He was also the only one of them who was academically trained. He was graduated from the St. Petersburg Conservatory. And the other 3 were quite hostile to the idea of academic music. And in fact, they all had different careers. Rimsky-Korsakov was in the Navy, Borodin was a chemist, and Mussorgsky was a soldier. So I have these visions of the 3 of them trying to write these magnificent masterpieces in their spare time from working in medical hospitals and being out in the sea. In fact, you often hear the sea as a very presence in Rimsky-Korsakov's music. And the character of the 4 composers, I think, are very different. Mussorgsky, I think, was probably the darkest of the 4, in a sense. He had quite a troubled life, and he was an alcoholic, and generally things didn't work out terribly well for him. And lots of his music was unfinished, and people finished it. And some of these attempts to finish it tended to polish them up a little bit, but more and more people are going back to Mussorgsky's original compositions and finding them to be really futuristic in a way. They're quite, really quite revolutionary for their time. And when I think of Borodin, I have to say I have a soft spot for Borodin that isn't shared by everybody I know, but I think of these expansive, wonderful works like Prince Igor, the opera. I mean, there's a fantastic work, very long, very big, very grand. I hope someday we can do it. I'm afraid it's not in the plans just yet, but it's definitely one that we would love to do at some point. Hugely challenging, very melodic, very beautiful, very colorful. And of course, color and orchestration was really important from Rimsky-Korsakov as well, and fairy tales, all that beauty and fantasy that exists in his music. So I hope we'll hear a lot of that tonight. And then Tchaikovsky. Well, Tchaikovsky did use a lot of Russian music as well, but I suppose he saw himself as more European in outlook and more academic and more formal in a way than the others. I guess he was the only one of the four we're hearing tonight who was really full-time composer and dedicated his life exclusively to composition. Of course, he did have a generous patron who allowed him to do that. So we're going to hear three arias from Tchaikovsky tonight, one from his opera Jolanta and two from Eugen Onegin. So I'm going to allow, as I said, I'm going to allow the singers to introduce each aria. We'll hear all six in turn, and then I'll come back. And after we've heard this, we have a fantastic opportunity to speak live to the amazing Irish composer Jennifer Walsh. And I'm really excited to talk to Jennifer about music and about opera and about things that she has planned. We'll speak to her after the six arias. I'd also like to remind you that there's a program available for tonight's episode. And if you look onto our website, irishnationalopera.ie, you can download the program if you haven't already done so. And in the program, you'll get more information about the arias and the performers as well. And we'd love to hear from you. We'd love your comments on Facebook or YouTube. Let us know where you're listening to us from. That's always nice to know that we have an audience all around Ireland and internationally. And tell us, what's your favorite Russian opera? What would you love to see on a stage? And I hope you share my enthusiasm for Russian opera. And if you don't already know it, hopefully you will hear something tonight maybe you haven't heard before. So let's go now, and we are going to start with Rimsky-Korsakov's Snow Maiden's aria, sung by Sarah Shine. Thank you.
In this aria by Rimsky-Korsakov, Sneguchka, the Snow Maiden, is pleading with her family to allow her to go and be with the mortals, to sing with them, to rejoice with them. She pleads with her family and promises that if she does, she will sing songs of joy and love in the forest where they live.
Бога духа дит, на угликих веселый отзываться. Повторят с девицами припев весенних песен. Милостный городки твоей без песен жизни в радости. Без песни жизни в радости, не в радость.
This aria is from Borodin's Prince Igor, and the prince is in prison, and he is reliving the events of his life: battle, glory, love.
Ни сна, ни отдыха измученной душе. Мне ночь не шлет отрады и забвенья. Всё прошлое я вновь переживаю. Один в тиши ночей. И Божья знамения угрозу, и бранной славы первесовый мою победу над врагом, и бранной славы горестный конец, погром и рану и мой плен, и гибель всех моих полков. Честно за родину головы сложивших. Погибло все, и честь моя, и слава, позором стал я земли родной. Плен, постыдный плен, вот удел отныне мой, да мысль, что все винят меня. Дайте мне свободу, я мой позор сумею искупить. Спасу я честь свою и славу, я Русь от недруга спасу. Ты нем влачить в плену бесплодно и знать, что враг терзает Русь. Враг, что лютый парс стонет Русь, как тях могучих, и в том винит она меня. О, дайте мне свободу, я мой позор сумею искупить. Я Русь от недруга спасу. Ни сна, ни отдыха измученной душе. Мне ночь не шлет надежды на спасение. Лишь прошлое я вновь переживаю. Один в тиши ночей. И нет исхода мне. О, тяжко, тяжко мне, тяжко сознание бессилия моего.
In this aria, Tsar Boris Godunov has told Shuisky that he is terrified. He has just learned that there is a pretender who is challenging his right to the throne, and that pretender is claiming to be Dmitri. This shocks Boris because he actually had Dmitri killed as a young boy who was the rightful heir to the throne. And Tsar Boris goes to Prince Shuisky and says, "Tell me, is this true? You were there. Tell me, did you see the dead body of the child?" And in this aria, Prince Shuisky tries to comfort Boris, to say, "Yes, I saw the dead child," although Prince Shuisky has his own manipulative intentions of his own.
Страшна твоя немилость, перед тобой могу ли я лукавить? Три дня в Угличе в соборе я вокруг него 13 тел.
And now we have this beautiful aria from Tchaikovsky's Iolantha. Now, Tchaikovsky is one of the most prolific composers, along with Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart. And it's no wonder, because his music is romantic and beautiful. And here, Iolantha, the blind princess, speaks of her sadness, because nobody has told her she's blind, and she knows she is missing out on something from the world.
Atchevo et a prezhde znala, ni duse ni goria ni slaz. If
Here we have Lenski in Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin. Yesterday, Lenski rashly challenged his great friend Onegin to a duel. And in this aria, he ponders what has brought him to this point, and he yearns for the days of his youth.
Kuda vi udalilis, viesli mae, zlati jedli. Serdeczny drog, żelany drog, pridi, pridi. Żelany drog, pridi, a twój sobruk, pridi, a twój sobruk, pridi, pridi. Ja szute żelany drog, pridi, pridi.
In this aria from Eugene Onegin, Onegin has received Tatiana's letter declaring her love for him, and he returns to visit her to rebuke her advances, telling her that life together wouldn't exactly be a bed of roses.
Pisali, ja pirajtes, ja прочел души да верчива и признания, любви невинные излияния. Мне ваша искренность мила, она волнение привела давно умолкнувшие чувства. Но восхвалить я не хочу, я за нее вам отплачу признанием также без искусства. Примите исповедь мою, себя на суд вам отдаю. Когда бы жизнь домашним кругом я ограничить захотел, когда мне быть отцом-супругом приятный жребий повелел, то верно, кроме вас одной невесты не искал иной. Не создан для блаженства, ему чужда душа моя. Напрасны ваши совершенства, их недостоин вовсе я, а верьте совестным порукой, супружество нам будет мукой. Я сколько не любил бы вас, привыкнув, разлюблю тот час. Суды жди, какие розы нам заготовит Гименей. И, может быть, нам много дней. Мечтами года нет возврата, ох, нет возврата, не обновлю души моей. Я вас люблю любовью брата, любовью брата, и, может быть, еще нежнее, и, может быть, еще нежнее. Послушайте ж меня без гнева, сменить не размладая дева. Мечтами легкие мечты.
Bravo to Ben McAteer there, who finished that selection of Russian arias with the heartbreaking, absolutely devastating aria from the end of Act 1 of Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin, where he cruelly rejects the advances of Tatiana, a move he will live to regret by the end of the opera, don't worry. So thank you very much to all our artists, to Sarah Shine, Gyula Nagy, Brenton Ryan, Claudia Boyle, Gavan Ring, Ben McAteer, and to our wonderful pianists, Gary Beecher, who played for the first 3 arias, and then Aoife O'Sullivan for the second group of arias. They have to conjure up that wonderful Russian romantic orchestral sound, which they do so brilliantly. Thank you so much. And those recordings were made specially for this program, so we hope you enjoyed them, and I hope it's triggered an interest in Russian opera amongst any of you who might not be so familiar. But I think there's a huge richness there to be discovered. But now we come to, we look forward as well, because of course with Irish National Opera, we do a lot of new work as well as the historic repertoire. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Jennifer Walsh now. And Jennifer is a composer who we will be featuring in future seasons. She already took part in our 20 Shots of Opera with Libris Solar. I hope everybody who watched the 20 Shots of Opera got down to the very last one, because with your surname beginning with W, Jennifer, it's an awful handicap. I know, because mine is S, and we end up at the bottom of lists. But it's well worth it. I hope everybody got there. So Jennifer, thank you for joining us. And I just wanted to ask you, first of all, I suppose you've written a lot of operas, and maybe just tell us what brings you as a contemporary composer, what makes you feel that opera is a great way to express yourself through your work?
Well, good evening, Fergus. It's very nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And next time you do a 20 Shots of Opera, you'll have to do a reverse alphabetical order for the participants. Put Gerald Barry last for once. But I suppose, why wouldn't you be drawn to opera? I would say, why wouldn't that be interesting? Any musical performance is inherently theatrical. We're starting to make judgments about how the music sounds and what it means the second the performers walk on the stage. Even, I would argue, the second we set foot in the performance space, we're getting a lot of information that has nothing to do with the sonic frequencies of the piece, and that's informing how we listen to things. So I would view like an orchestral performance as incredibly theatrical. If you go to see Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is, the first orchestral piece where trombones make a proper appearance as part of the ensemble, it's incredibly exciting to watch those trombonists sit boredly through the first 3 movements of the piece till they get their moment and they get to come in. And that for me is a theatrical experience. So opera seems completely natural because you get to sort of amplify all of those elements. You get to play with them, you get to stage with them much more and sort of explore them in different ways. So for me, it's always been something that's very interesting.
And Jennifer, could I just ask you, it might surprise people to know that even though you're much younger than me, I think we played in the National Youth Orchestra together when we were teenagers. And we would have played a lot of this Russian repertoire that, similar to what we've heard tonight. But when you sort of started out on a path of composition, your music in a way couldn't be more different to what we've heard earlier. So how did you start down that path to begin, and what sort of drew you to compose in the way that you now do?
I think I'm hugely grateful to those structures that existed in Ireland when I was a kid, like the Irish Youth Orchestra and also the Irish Youth Wind Ensemble and the orchestras at the Royal Irish Academy that Jimmy Kavanagh conducted, because that's what started me down that road, really. Like, I think we both lived through the Irish Youth Orchestra through the most hubristic phase of the Irish National Youth Orchestra, when we did The Rite of Spring and Petrushka and Mahler 2 and Mahler 5 with the youth orchestra, these huge pieces. So when I think about orchestration, I still think of what it's like to be a trumpet player, because I was a trumpet player sitting at the back watching, oh, this is how they get this sound, that when the alto flute picks up their alto flute and the E-flat clarinet and plays 2 octaves in parallel, that's how we get this amazing sound. So I feel very grateful that I got to have those experiences. do those really insanely meaty pieces, because that got me into just the idea that music is made in a community, and that there's friendships are made there, lifelong relationships are made there, as well as the music itself. And then I, like many composers, I just had a series of teachers who were more and more liberating and more encouraged me and challenged me to make the music that I wanted to hear, even if it seemed a little bit unorthodox or a little bit different to the music that the youth orchestra would have played. And so I was very lucky in that I managed to find those mentors, find those people along my way, and start to write the things that I want to write. This sort of try to actually make those situations, and whether they be sonic or theatrical or textual, that I have in my head.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Actually, I think the high point of the National Youth Orchestra might have been the Ring cycle that they did in 2002, which was even bigger than what we did. But just in terms of, and in fact, I totally agree with you, because I played the viola and I was in the middle of everything playing the viola. I think it's a great instrument to play because you're surrounded by this incredible surround sound. But I was interested in that word you used just there, liberating. You found it liberating. Some composers I've talked to sort of talk about the weight of history of music, like the music history being a weight on their shoulders, or a sense that you had to rebel against it. But you're talking about liberation. So did you find it like finding your own voice originally? Was that kind of a joyous experience?
I think when I had the right teachers, it was. I think that if you're a female composition student and you're looking at the weight of musical history as it's presented to you in a conservatoire, it's a pretty male weight, if that makes sense. You don't see yourself represented in that. So as a result, I think the bonus of that is that you're not thinking you're having to deal with Beethoven and Bach, because you don't think they care about you, or you don't think that you have a position within that tradition, and of course I'm a white person, in that sort of situation. So at least, I'm seeing people who have the same ethnicity as me, and I'm still feeling like I don't fit in. If you have a student who's a person of color in that situation, they certainly feel they're not represented in the canon as it's taught to them in most conservatoires. So as a result of that, I didn't feel that the weight of history was sitting on my shoulders, because I didn't feel that I was a suitable enough person for it to sit on, if that makes sense. But also, if you're a brass player, there's a little bit of that, because for brass player, there is no musical history. There is just music with brass instruments in it and everything else, which is music that they don't bother with. So you already had a sort of a different way of looking at what music history was. So I was lucky. I had teachers who really... And when I say, it was liberating, it was a rigorous liberation, if that makes sense. It was like not just throw things out, but if you're going to do something, if you want to write with paper bags, okay, how many paper bags? What paper are they made from? Could you make the paper yourself? Could you grow the tree that the paper is made from? So I was lucky in that regard, because ultimately every single composer out there has a way of writing that they want to write in. And they have to sort of get out of their own way. And part of being a composer for your lifetime is continually getting out of your own way and trying to figure out what is it that you actually want to do when you're not thinking you should write in a certain way, or in response to horrible comments somebody made on the internet, or even a compliment that you received that you think, oh, now I should always write like that. So it's just the same job day after day of trying to get down to the truth of it.
That's an interesting piece of advice, to get out of your own way. I like that. And can I ask you, your scores, if I was to pick up one of your scores and look at it, they're very different from other scores. It's not, I'm sure you often do use traditional notation, but in many cases you notate things very differently. There's lots of graphs and pictures and diagrams and instructions. And you often ask your instrumentalists and your singers to do, I guess, what they're called extended techniques, unusual things that are beyond what they might normally do, and often, play different instruments, or make noises out of different found materials and things like that, like the paper you were talking about. So where does that come from? Like, if I asked you to write a piece of music tomorrow morning, where would you start in coming up with ideas, or are they just floating around in your head all the time?
I mean, I think like most people, there's a whole rake of different ideas, little things that you're always thinking about. I'm a professor at the University of Music and Performing Arts in Stuttgart, and I recently did a project with my students where I said, I want you to write down all the ideas that you have for pieces that you've always wanted to realize, but you haven't yet been able to realize, maybe because it's financial or technical or it just doesn't fit in your schedule. And these are all people in their 20s, and they had lists and lists and lists of ideas. They instantly had all these things that they were interested in. So I suppose the one job is that if you have a lot of different ideas, you're always thinking, what's the right project? Where does it fit? Where does it make sense? So sometimes you might have an idea that's floating around in the back of your head for a long time, and then somebody asks you to do a project and you think, oh, this is the right, now I have the right situation. So the very first opera that I ever wrote was for Barbie dolls. And prior to that, I had sort of thought, I don't connect with opera. I'm never going to write an opera. And then I was reading about marionette operas and about Haydn, writing these marionette operas that would be performed during the summer when the theaters were closed. And the second that I read about marionette operas, I started thinking about Barbie dolls and Cindy dolls that I had when I was a kid, and the things that we would act out with them. And all of a sudden opera was interesting to me because I could connect it with my experience, from my life. And I thought, I want to write an opera for Barbie dolls. And, a year later, somebody said to me, what sort of projects, if you were to do a music theatre piece, what have you got? And I said, well, I got this and that and this. Oh, and this Barbie doll idea. And they were like, yes, we want to do the Barbie doll. So I'm used to that idea that you have things floating around, and that sometimes a conversation happens a week after you had the idea, but sometimes it can be years later. But that's part of the process.
And I know that you're very interested in science. The last piece of yours I saw, Time, was an opera about science. And I know it's something that you're thinking about in future pieces as well. Science and music are maybe not always seen as compatible or, natural bedfellows. Why do you think opera is a good, a vehicle for getting across things to do with science?
I think that, for me, to actually take time to meditate on some of the sort of the facets of the universe and the world that we live in that science elucidates for us, we need that sort of artistic dream space that we get in an opera or a film. We can watch a film about quantum physics, and it can sort of open up the space for us to dream and let those ideas resonate deeply enough that we really start to wonder and our minds start to be blown at these concepts. So I sort of feel like my operas are they're sort of like experimental documentaries about scientific aspects of the world that we live in. And it feels natural to work in that way. It's a sort of an experimental documentary making, I suppose. I would think of it that way. And what's wonderful about it is that the projects, like, for example, with Time, when I was working on it, I was really interested in how we measure time. And so I just randomly cold called the National Physical Laboratory in London, and they have all the atomic clocks for the UK. They supply the time for the BBC. That's what it's called technically. So I just cold called them and said, could I come over and film and record your atomic clocks? And they called me back and said, yeah, come on down. We're going to give you a tour of the lab. And they showed me the special machine that the BBC get their time from. And they showed me around all these different atomic clocks. And it was just completely wonderful to have this experience talking to scientists in a completely organic way, that I was interested, and they thought this was really nice. And I ended up being there for hours and loads of footage, and the footage made it into the opera. And when we performed the opera in London, they all came to the performance, and they thought it was really nice that there was footage of their labs. So these sort of, I think these sort of, the way to join science and music is to let it completely just be driven by the art rather than force a collaboration between a scientist and a composer. That often doesn't work. But for me, I wanted to know more about these things because it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's going to sing, can you turn on the atomic clock? But just me having gone to the lab, shot that footage, thought about those things more deeply means that the piece itself is stronger.
Brilliant. Jennifer, we could talk all night, but thank you so much for that. We're going to just hear a short piece of your music now, and it's a performance from a few years ago that we have that we're going to show. Would you introduce it for us? Thank you.
Sure. This is a piece called Watch It Over Lovingly by Silent Machines, and it's a piece that was commissioned for the Donaueschingen Musiktage in 2011. It was commissioned for the wonderful German vocal ensemble, the Neue Vokalsolist in Stuttgart, and it's one of many pieces I've written for that group. But I'm really thrilled that the performance you're going to feature tonight is by Ensemble, which is an Irish group run by Elizabeth Hilliard. This is a documentation of a performance that they did as part of a 2-day festival of all my vocal music at the Project Arts Centre, which took place in 2016. So the piece is quite long. It's about 25 minutes long. I think you're only going to watch the first 3.5 minutes. But I was very interested working on this piece in the fact that we could have music, we could have images on the film part, we could have text, we could have physical gestures, and we could have sound that was made using objects as well as sound that we would classify as musical. Because when we watch a performance of music, there's different centers in our brains are firing. There's even 2 different centers, one for musical sounds and one for noise sounds that are firing, as well as like the speech area, as well as the visual cortex. So this is something from a technical perspective. I think of this as my type of counterpoint. Is that I'm weaving these different levels together, the visual, the textual, the objects that people would associate with their everyday life, movements that people would make that don't even have sound, as well as the sonic. So this sort of gives you a sense, and I'm really glad because this for me, this whole festival, Elizabeth Hilliard is one of the best interpreters of my music, and I feel really blessed to have an interpreter like Liz out there, and all the performers did a fantastic job. And the whole thing is on YouTube. So if anybody feels that they want to see the rest of it, they can very easily go find the rest of the performance there.
There was a visitor, there were 10 visitors, there were 20 little rifles, there were 10 she wished she had gone. The law was intended to be lasting, the law was intended to just miss, the law was not intended to connect. There were times she rolled over in the night, there were times she rolled over in the night and he sat up. There was a visitor, there were 10 visitors, there were times he missed his rifle, there were times she wished she had gone. There were times he rolled over in the night and thought he was somewhere else. The law was intended to be lasting, the law was intended to just miss, the law was not intended to connect. There was a visitor, there were 10 visitors, there were times he missed his rifle. There was a mob and a woman and a pile of men. There was glass everywhere. The law was intended to be lasting, the law was intended to just miss, the law was not intended to connect. There was vomit on the floor and his feet. There was a visitor, there were 10 visitors, there were times he missed his rifle.
Thank you so much to Jennifer Walsh for being with us tonight and for sharing that. Thank you also to Ensemble and Elizabeth Hilliard for allowing us broadcast that short excerpt. Jennifer is a real well of creativity, and I can't wait to work with her on one of our forthcoming projects at Irish National Opera. So that's everything we have for you tonight. I just wanted to say thanks to everybody who took part, to all our performers, and everybody who helped put tonight together. We did have some lovely comments from people who were watching all around the country and internationally as well. A lot of people love the Russian opera. Patricia McCullough would like to see Borodin's Prince Igor, so would I, Patricia. And Paula Dunn would love to see Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk, which is a great suggestion as well, another fantastic Russian opera. Patricia O'Hara wants Eugene Onegin first. You might well get your wish, Patricia, if you keep in touch there. And Wendy O'Connell is also voting for Eugene Onegin. So there we go. Lots of lovely supportive comments. And thank you to all our viewers and to all our supporters. We have a fantastic family of supporters at Irish National Opera who donate to our company and help us do everything that we're doing. And we thank you most sincerely for your support. To Fedora, the European Circle of Philanthropists who have helped this series, to the Bord Gáis Energy Theatre and to the Goethe Institute, where we filmed the arias, as well as some of them filmed in our own office in Dame Street in Dublin. And of course, most of all, thanks to the Arts Council, our principal funder, without whom nothing would be possible. So that's it for this week. Next week, we will be hearing lots of music by all one composer. Richard Strauss is on the menu next week. Some glorious music from him. And we'll also get a chance to chat to composer Amanda Feary, who has an exciting new project coming up very shortly. We're just about to start rehearsals next Wednesday on Amanda's new piece. So it's all happening, and Amanda will be here to tell us all about it. So that's it for tonight. Thank you very much, and goodbye.